So the simple answer to that, I think, is yes. Obviously, learning has changed enormously over the last 20 years, but there's certain things within that that fundamentally will always be true, and that is, how do we maximize our ability to impact learners in the most effective way? Whilst there's been significant growth in use of digital media, content, and learning type activities, it's still really, really important to be able to impact learners in create strong learning experiences, and frankly also motivate learners as part of a process. So instructor-led training, both in terms of its face-to-face and virtual forms, still has a significant role within that. It still consumes quite a lot of corporate budgets. We've seen a lot of growth in virtual instructor-led delivery, and arguably that's one of the biggest trends in the last probably 3 or 4 years. It's not new technology necessarily, but it's become really, really significant. So yes, absolutely, and instructor-led training has a critical role within the learning mix in the modern learning ecosystem. So there are lots of challenges organizations face around it. That was true, of course, in absolute terms all the time. But in the modern world, it's become, the pressures around it have become more extreme, I suppose. I'm sure we'll talk about COVID separately, but at the end of the day, that's obviously massively changed the dynamics for a lot of organizations. At the end of the day, it comes down to really basic things. How fast can I reach my audience? How can I impact my audience? How do I create kind of stronger experiences, etc.? When it comes then down to barriers, the barriers are fairly obvious. So it's around resource, costs, travel, time for delivery, and all of these things create huge challenges for organizations in order to be able to optimize how they can deliver to their audience. The biggest ones probably ultimately are around how do I reach my audience fast enough, and how can I be agile enough in terms of engaging with them. That's clearly a challenge. Ultimately, budget is always a challenge as well. So how do I optimize where I spend money and how I spend money? And probably the other one is around what kind of value or impact do I actually get from that. That's probably the most hidden one. I think in learning organizations historically have been very guilty of ignoring focusing on what outcomes they get from these activities, and focusing all on what I would call input challenges rather than necessarily. But obviously that's also critical as well. And I think the more effectively you can show that, the easier it is then to justify everything else that you want to do. The final thing obviously is ultimately, especially if it's face-to-face delivery, then people have to be there physically to do that. And obviously, again, in the current climate, that's obviously very difficult to do. But even before recent challenges, the reality of traveling everybody around has always been hugely significant, which is one of the reasons why we've also seen huge growth, I think, in virtual instructor-led training activities as well.